You are on HOA backfired. The mailbox cluster heard every threat. You are making this worse for yourself. Barbara stood 3 feet from my face, one finger jabbing toward a tiny nail head sticking out of the fence post, her voice climbing into a shriek that probably carried across the whole cul-de-sac. She yelled that exposed nails were a violation, and she would fine me daily until I fixed it, tore down the whole fence, or paid whatever number she decided to invent next. Her phone was mounted on a little gimbal rig, recording everything from chest height, the lens inches from my nose. I held a pen so tight my knuckles went white, and I did not say a word back because I already had something in my pocket she did not know about. This is Harbor Point Community Association in Boston, Massachusetts, and I work nights as a fire alarm technician, which means I deal with broken sensors and angry building managers when most people are asleep. I came home that Tuesday afternoon expecting to finish the fence line I started 2 days earlier, maybe get 4 hours of sleep before my next shift, and instead I got Barbara Taylor, social committee chair, standing in my yard with her phone and her laminated policy sheet held out like a shield. The fence was not even done yet. I had 4 posts set, 2 panels up, and a string line running the length of the property to keep everything straight. She did not care. She said the posts were 3 inches too tall, the setback was wrong, and I never got approval even though I submitted the form 6 weeks ago and the board never responded. I moved to Harbor Point 18 months ago because the rent was cheaper than downtown, and I thought a quiet suburb would mean fewer complaints about my odd hours. The HOA seemed normal at first, standard rules about trash cans and lawn height, but then I started noticing the letters. Every month someone got a violation notice for something minor. A bush 6 inches over the sidewalk, a mailbox post that needed paint, a car parked in the driveway overnight instead of the garage. The fines started small and doubled every week until people either paid or fought it at a hearing where the board always voted against them. I kept my head down, paid my dues, and figured if I followed every rule exactly I would be fine. That lasted until I decided to replace the rotting fence between my yard and the easement strip behind the property. I submitted the fence application in early March. I included dimensions, materials, a diagram, and a survey I paid $200 to get. The rules said the board had 30 days to respond. They did not. I waited 6 weeks, then I called the management company and they said the board was reviewing it. I waited another 2 weeks and heard nothing. I had a narrow window to get the work done before my shift schedule changed, so I started the project. I figured if they had a problem they would say something before I finished. I was wrong. Barbara showed up the first morning I set the posts. She parked her car at the curb, walked through my side gate without knocking, and stood there filming me while I mixed concrete. She did not say hello. She said I was in violation of Section 12.4, unauthorized construction, and she was documenting everything for the compliance committee. I asked her what was unauthorized. She said I never got approval. I told her I submitted the form 2 months ago. She said the board denied it. I asked when. She said it was in the minutes. I said I never got a denial letter. She smiled and said that was my problem, not hers. Then she walked back to her car and left. I called the management company again. They said they had no record of a denial and the application was still pending. I asked if that meant I could keep working. They said they could not give me legal advice and I should consult the covenants. I looked up the covenants. They said pending applications default to approval after 45 days unless the board issues a written denial. It had been 63 days. I kept working. Barbara came back the next day with a tape measure. She did not knock this time either. She just walked into the yard, stretched the tape from the ground to the top of the nearest post, and started yelling before I even turned around. The post was 74 inches tall. The rules said 72 inches maximum. She said I was 2 inches over and she was filing an immediate compliance action. I told her the posts were not trimmed yet, She said it did not matter, the violation existed right now, and the fine started today. I asked how much. She said $50 per day until I tore it down and resubmitted. I did 50-hour weeks. I could not afford $50 a day for something I was going to fix anyway. I asked Barbara to show me the written denial. She said it was in the board packet from last month. I said I wanted a copy. She said board packets were not public unless I filed a formal records request, which cost $25 and took 2 weeks. I said that was insane. She smiled again and said, "You do not get an opinion, you get a fine schedule." Then she took another dozen photos, told me she was sending everything to the compliance officer, and left. I stood there holding a post level and trying not to throw it. That night at work, I told my buddy Marcus what was happening. Marcus does IT for a hospital and he has a brain for tracking digital trails. He said if Barbara claimed the board denied my application, there should be meeting minutes with a vote recorded. He said HOA boards have to keep minutes by state law and I could request them even if it cost money. He also said if they were lying about the denial, that was a paper trail I could use later. I decided to pay the $25. I submitted the records request the next morning. The management company sent me a form to fill out, which I did, and they said it would take up to 14 business days. I did not have 14 days. I had a neighbor named Ed who lived 2 doors down, and he was already filming the fence drama from his front window and posting about it in the neighborhood group chat. Ed worked from home, and he loved drama. He sent me a screenshot of Barbara's post in the private HOA board chat, where she said I was a problem tenant who refused to follow rules and she was going to make an example of me. Ed said if I did not move fast, Barbara would twist the story before I could defend myself. He was right. That was my time pressure. I went back to the fence the next afternoon. I trimmed the posts down to 72 inches exactly, measured 3 times, and took photos of the tape measure on every post. I figured that would kill the height violation. It did not. Barbara showed up an hour later with a clipboard and her phone. She said the posts were now in compliance for height, but the setback was still wrong. I asked what setback. She pointed at the string line and said the fence was 6 inches over the property line into the easement. I told her I had a survey. She said the survey was outdated. I said it was 2 months old. She said the city changed the easement boundaries last year and my survey did not reflect the new line. I asked where the new line was. She said she did not have to tell me, that was my responsibility to find out, and the fine was now $75 per day because I ignored the first violation and made it worse. I called the city planning office. They said there was no easement change in the last 5 years and the boundaries were the same as my survey. I asked if they could send me something in writing. They said they could email me a GIS map excerpt. I said yes. They sent it 20 minutes later. The map matched my survey exactly. I printed it and went back outside. Barbara was gone, but she left a bright yellow caution tape rule hanging from the fence line, stretched between 2 stakes she hammered into the ground herself. The tape said HOA boundary dispute in black letters. It was the most absurd thing I had ever seen. Ed texted me a photo of Barbara putting up the tape. He said she did it while I was inside on the phone with the city, and she was muttering to herself the whole time about making sure I understood who was in charge. He also said she posted in the group chat that I was ignoring a lawful stop work order and the board was considering legal action. I did not get any stop work order. Ed said Barbara probably meant the caution tape. I told him that was not a legal order. He said it did not matter if people believed her first. I needed an ally who could vouch for me in public, but Ed was terrified of retaliation. He said Barbara had a history of targeting people who crossed her, and he did not want his own house on her radar. He would help me behind the scenes, but he would not go on camera or speak at a meeting. That was my side complication. I had evidence, but no one willing to stand up with me in front of the board. I kept working on the fence. I installed 2 more panels, checked the setback again with the city map, and took photos of every step. I also started recording every interaction with Barbara on my phone. Massachusetts is a 2-party consent state for audio, so I only recorded video with no sound, but that was enough to show what she was doing. The 3rd time she came into my yard, I had my phone propped on the back porch railing, chest high, recording everything. She walked up to the fence, examined the new panels, and then she did something I did not expect. She grabbed the tape measure from my toolbox, stretched it along the fence height again, and then moved it to measure the gap between the bottom of the panels and the ground. She said the gap was too large, the rules required no more than 2 inches of clearance, and I had 4 inches. I told her I had not finished trimming the bottom rails yet. She said the violation existed right now, and she was adding it to the list. That was when I realized Barbara was not just enforcing rules, she was hunting for violations faster than I could fix them. Every time I corrected one problem, she found 2 more. The fines were stacking up on paper even though I had not received a single official notice in the mail. I called the management company again and asked if they were sending me violation letters. They said the compliance officer had not submitted any paperwork yet. I asked when that would happen. They said it depended on the officer's schedule. I realized Barbara was building a case in her notes and her photos, and she was going to dump it all on me at once with a bill for thousands of dollars. I needed to flip the script. I went back to Marcus and showed him the video of Barbara measuring the fence. He noticed something I missed. In the background of the video, you could see Barbara's car parked at the curb, and the timestamp on my phone showed she arrived at 2:47 in the afternoon. Marcus pulled up the HOA board meeting minutes from the month before, and he found a line that said the board met in executive session from 2:30 to 4:15 that same day. If Barbara was at a board meeting, she could not have been in my yard at the same time. Marcus said that meant either the minutes were fake, or Barbara skipped the meeting to harass me, or the meeting happened on a different day and someone backdated the minutes. Any of those options was bad for the board. I did not argue with Barbara after that, because I already had something in my pocket she did not know about. I kept working on the fence, I kept recording, and I kept collecting evidence. I also started looking into the HOA's vendor relationships, because Marcus said if Barbara was this aggressive about enforcement, there was probably money involved somewhere. I found what I was looking for in the HOA's annual budget report, which was public record and posted on the community website. The report listed payments to a contractor named Prestige Property Services for fence removal, landscaping enforcement, and emergency repairs. The total for the year was $48,000, which seemed high for a neighborhood of 60 houses. I looked up Prestige Property Services. The business address was a P.O. box, and the owner was listed as Michael Dunn. I searched Michael Dunn and found a property record showing he co-owned a rental unit with Barbara Taylor. They bought it together in 2018. That was my trump card. I did not tell anyone yet. I wanted to wait until Barbara escalated again so the reveal would hit harder. I did not have to wait long. 2 days later, I got a certified letter from an attorney named Ronald Peterman. The letter said I was in violation of multiple covenants, I had ignored lawful stop work orders, and the HOA was demanding immediate removal of the fence and payment of all accumulated fines, which the letter claimed totaled $3,200. The letter gave me 7 days to comply, or the HOA would file a lien against my property and pursue legal action. It was pure bluff language meant to scare me into paying instantly, but it worked as my escalation step 2. I now had a paper trail showing the HOA was threatening legal action before they even sent me a violation notice through the management company. I called Ronald Peterman's office. The receptionist said he was not available. I asked if he had reviewed the case file before sending the letter. She said she could not discuss client matters. I asked if he knew the board never formally denied my fence application. She said she would pass my message along. I never heard back. Marcus said that was standard for HOA attorneys. They send scary letters, collect a flat fee from the board, and hope the homeowner folds. He said the smart move was to respond in writing, cite the facts, and force them to put up or shut up. I wrote a response letter. I listed the application timeline, the lack of a formal denial, the city GIS map showing my setback was correct, and the fact that I had not received any official violation notices despite Barbara's claims. I also mentioned the tape measure video and the meeting minutes discrepancy. I sent the letter to Ronald Peterman, the management company, and every board member I could find an address for. I did not mention the Prestige Property Services connection yet. I was saving that. Barbara responded by calling the city. I found out because a code enforcement officer named Luis showed up at my house the next morning with a clipboard and a tired expression. He said he got a complaint about unpermitted construction, and he needed to inspect the fence. I showed him my fence application, the survey, the city GIS map, and the photos of every step. He looked at the fence, measured the height and setback himself, and then he shook his head. He said the fence was fine, the complaint was bogus, and he was marking it closed. He also said this was the third false complaint he had gotten from Harbor Point in the last 6 months, and if it kept happening, he was going to start fining the HOA for wasting city resources. That was Barbara's tactic. She could not win on the facts, so she tried to slow me down with outside pressure. Luis left and I finished the fence that afternoon. I installed the last 2 panels, trimmed everything, stained the wood, and took final photos. The fence was 72 inches tall, 6 inches inside the property line, and 2 inches of clearance at the bottom. It was perfect. I texted Ed and told him to keep recording because I had a feeling Barbara was going to lose it when she saw the finished project. She did. She showed up an hour later, and this time she brought a witness. The witness was another board member named Carol, an older woman who usually stayed quiet during meetings but always voted with Barbara. Carol held a phone filming while Barbara walked the length of the fence, pointing at every panel and yelling that the stain color was not approved, the grain direction was wrong, and the posts were not capped. I asked where the rules said any of that. Barbara held up her laminated policy sheet and said it was all in Section 9.2, Aesthetic Standards. I asked to see the section. She pulled the sheet back and said I could request a copy through the management company for $15. I told her that was extortion. She said, "You do not get an opinion, you get a fine schedule." That was the moment I knew I had her. She said the exact same line twice, word for word, and both times Ed and I had it on video. It showed intent. It showed she was not enforcing rules, she was targeting me personally. I smiled and told her I would see her at the next board meeting. She said I was not allowed to attend because I had outstanding fines. I said that was not how it worked and I would be there with my attorney if I needed one. She laughed and said, "Make it public, I love watching people get embarrassed." That was her boomerang line, and I knew it was going to come back on her hard. The board meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday at 7 in the evening. I had 3 days to prepare. Marcus helped me put together a presentation. We printed the meeting minutes with the timestamp discrepancy highlighted, the city GIS map, the code enforcement officer's closure report, the attorney letter, my response letter, and the video still showing Barbara in my yard while the board was supposedly in session. We also printed the HOA budget report with the Prestige Property Services payments circled in red and the property record showing Barbara and Michael Dunn as co-owners. That was my trump card, and I was going to deploy it in front of the whole board so the legal risk was obvious. Ed agreed to come to the meeting as a silent witness. He would not speak, but he would sit in the front row and film everything on his phone so Barbara could not claim I disrupted the meeting or lied about what was said. Marcus could not make it because he had a shift, but he texted me good luck and told me to stay calm no matter what Barbara said. I told him I would try. The meeting was held in the community clubhouse, a small building near the pool with a conference table and folding chairs. About 15 people showed up, which was more than usual. Most of them were there because Ed posted in the group chat that I was going to challenge the board over the fence fines, and people wanted to see what would happen. Barbara sat at the head of the table with Carol and 2 other board members, a man named Greg who handled the budget and a younger guy named Jeff who was the compliance officer. Jeff looked uncomfortable. Greg looked bored. Carol looked like she wanted to be anywhere else. Barbara looked smug. The meeting started with standard business. They approved the minutes from last month, discussed a proposal to repaint the pool fence, and argued about whether to replace the entrance sign. Then Barbara moved to new business and said they needed to address my fence violation. She said I ignored multiple warnings, installed an unapproved structure, and refused to cooperate with the compliance process. She said the board had no choice but to impose the full fine schedule and move forward with a lien. She said the total was now $4,100 because I added more panels after the first violation. She did not mention that I corrected the height issue or that the city said the fence was fine. If you are enjoying this story, hit the like button and subscribe so you do not miss the next one. I raised my hand. Barbara ignored me. I raised it higher. She sighed and said I could speak for 2 minutes during the homeowner comment period, which was at the end of the meeting. I said I wanted to respond to her claims now because they were factually wrong and the board was about to vote on a lien based on false information. She said that was not how meetings worked. Greg cut in and said if I had evidence I should present it so they could make an informed decision. Barbara glared at him, but she did not argue. She said I had 5 minutes. I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I handed each board member a packet with all my documents. I started with the application timeline. I said I submitted the fence application on March 8th, the board had 45 days to respond, and they never sent a written denial. I showed them the covenant section that said pending applications default to approval after 45 days. I said that meant my fence was technically approved by default on April 22nd, which was 3 weeks before I started building. Barbara interrupted and said the board voted to deny it in executive session. I asked when. She said March 30th. I asked for the meeting minutes showing the vote. She said executive session minutes were confidential. I said state law required boards to record all votes even in executive session, and if there was a vote it had to be in the minutes. She did not answer. I moved to the next document. I showed them the city GIS map and the code enforcement closure report. I said the setback was correct and the city confirmed the fence met all local codes. I said Barbara filed a false complaint with the city to harass me, and the code officer told me he would start fining the HOA if it happened again. Jeff looked at Barbara. Barbara said the city was wrong and the HOA had its own survey. I asked to see it. She said it was in the files. I said I wanted a copy. She said I could request it for $25. Greg cut in again and said if the HOA had a survey that contradicted the city, they should produce it now. Barbara did not say anything. I moved to the video stills. I showed them the timestamp on my phone proving Barbara was in my yard at 2:47 in the afternoon on the same day the board minutes said there was an executive session from 2:30 to 4:15. I said that meant either the minutes were fake or Barbara skipped the meeting. I asked which one it was. Carol looked at Barbara. Barbara said the meeting ended early and the minutes were incorrect. I asked if the board voted to approve incorrect minutes. Greg said they did not review executive session minutes in public meetings. I said that was convenient. Then I pulled out the budget report and the property record. I said the HOA paid Prestige Property Services $48,000 last year for enforcement and repairs. I said the owner of Prestige Property Services was Michael Dunn, and Michael Dunn co-owned a rental property with Barbara Taylor. I said that was a conflict of interest and possibly a kickback scheme. I said I was bringing a second copy for the HOA attorney, so the legal risk was obvious. I put the second copy on the table in front of Barbara. She did not touch it. Her face went white. The room went silent. Ed was filming from the front row. Greg picked up the property record and read it. Jeff looked at Barbara and said, "Is this true?" Barbara said it was none of their business. Greg said it absolutely was their business, because it meant every enforcement action Barbara filed could be challenged as biased. Carol said she did not know about the property. Jeff said he did not either. Barbara stood up and said I was making baseless accusations and trying to distract from my own violations. I said the violations were fake and I had proof. I played the video on my phone showing Barbara placing the caution tape in my yard and muttering to herself. The audio was faint, but you could hear her say, "He needs to learn his place." Greg closed the budget report and said the board needed to table the lien vote and open an internal review of the vendor payments. Jeff agreed. Carol nodded. Barbara said that was not necessary and they were overreacting. Greg said if they did not review it and a homeowner filed a lawsuit, the board could be held personally liable. That got everyone's attention. Jeff made a motion to table the lien vote and suspend all pending fines against my property until the review was complete. Carol seconded. Greg called for a vote. It passed 3-1. Barbara voted no. She looked at me and said this was not over. I said I thought she loved watching people get embarrassed. Her face went red. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. People came up to me in the hallway and said they had no idea the board was spending that much on one vendor, and they wanted to see the full review. Ed posted a summary in the group chat before we even left the building. By the next morning, 3 more homeowners filed formal complaints about vendor favoritism and Barbara's enforcement tactics. The management company called an emergency meeting for the following week. The emergency meeting turned into a budget review. Greg and another homeowner named Lisa went through every payment to Prestige Property Services for the last 3 years. They found that the company billed the HOA for work that was never done, inflated hours on projects that took half the time, and charged premium rates for basic tasks like mowing and trash removal. The total overpayment was estimated at over $30,000. Greg said it looked like fraud. Lisa said they needed to involve a lawyer and possibly the police. Barbara tried to defend the payments by saying Prestige was the only vendor willing to work with the HOA on short notice. But no one believed her. Jeff said he had emails showing Barbara personally approved every Prestige invoice without getting competing bids, which violated the HOA's own procurement policy. The board voted to terminate the contract with Prestige Property Services and refer the matter to an attorney for a potential lawsuit. They also voted to suspend Barbara from all enforcement duties pending the outcome of the review. Barbara resigned from the board the next day. Carol and Jeff stayed on, but they were both under pressure to step down. Greg became interim president, and he sent an email to the whole community apologizing for the vendor issues and promising transparency going forward. 2 weeks later, the HOA attorney sent a letter to every homeowner saying the board had identified financial irregularities in vendor payments and was conducting a full audit. The letter also said any fines issued by Barbara Taylor in the last 18 months were being reviewed for bias and homeowners could appeal without cost. I got a separate letter saying my fines were fully retracted and the board apologized for the enforcement overreach. The letter said my fence was approved retroactively and I did not owe anything. It felt like a win, but I was not done yet. I filed a formal complaint with the State Attorney General's office about the kickback scheme. I included all the documents, the budget reports, the property record, the emails Jeff forwarded showing Barbara's approval patterns, and a timeline of her enforcement actions against me. The AG's office opened an investigation. 3 months later, they referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal charges. Barbara hired a lawyer and stopped posting in the group chat. Michael Dunn dissolved Prestige Property Services and moved out of state. The HOA settled with the management company to avoid a lawsuit, and the management company agreed to install better financial oversight and require competitive bids for all contracts over $5,000. The recall vote happened 4 months after the first meeting. Greg stayed on as president because people trusted him to clean up the mess. 2 new board members were elected, both of them homeowners who had been fined by Barbara and wanted to make sure it never happened again. The new board passed a policy requiring all enforcement actions to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before fines were issued, and they created a homeowner appeals process that did not cost money. They also posted the full budget online every month so people could see where the money was going. It was not perfect, but it was better. Barbara never came back to a board meeting. I saw her once at the grocery store and she turned around and walked the other way. Carol moved out of the neighborhood 6 months later. Jeff stayed on the board for another year and then resigned to focus on his job. Greg served 2 more terms and then handed the presidency to Lisa, who is still running things now. The HOA is boring again, which is exactly what it should be. My fence is still standing. I stained it again last year to keep the wood protected, and I added a small gate on the side so I can access the easement path without walking around. The posts are still 72 inches, the setback is still 6 inches inside the property line, and the clearance at the bottom is still 2 inches. Everything is exactly to code. I take a photo of it every few months just in case someone ever tries to claim it was not approved, but no one has. The new board does not care about fences unless they are falling down or blocking the street. Ed still films everything that happens in the neighborhood, but now he is filming the new board doing normal things like fixing the entrance sign and organizing a block party. He says it is boring, but he likes boring. Marcus still tells people the story about how I exposed the kickback scheme with a budget report and a property record. He says it is the cleanest takedown he has ever seen. I tell him it was not clean, it was messy and stressful, and I barely slept for 2 months. But I am glad I did it, because the alternative was paying $4,000 for nothing and watching Barbara do it to someone else. The funny thing is, Barbara spent weeks telling me I was in violation and quoting rules down to the minute, but when the audit came back, it turned out she had been billing the HOA for vendor meetings that lasted 10 minutes and claiming they were hour-long sessions. The actual minutes contradicted her. She said the meetings were 90 minutes. The timestamps on the invoices showed they were 12 minutes. That was the funny karma beat, the moment where her own obsession with precision and documentation destroyed her credibility. She could not argue with her own invoices. The HOA sent a correction email retracting every public smear Barbara posted about my fence. They said the project was compliant, the complaints were unfounded, and the board apologized for any reputational harm. That was the HOA consequence. Barbara's credibility collapsed in front of witnesses when the budget review revealed her vendor favoritism and the property record proved she had been funneling HOA money to a company she co-owned. That was the Karen consequence. People who used to support her stopped returning her calls. The social committee dissolved because no one wanted to work with her. She lost her power, her reputation, and her role in the community, and it all happened because she picked a fight over 2 inches of fence post height and would not let it go. The final showdown happened at the shared mailbox cluster where neighbors gather and whisper while watching. It was not planned. I was checking my mail one afternoon, and Barbara pulled up in her car to check hers. Ed was standing nearby watering his lawn, and when he saw us both there, he paused mid-spray to stare. I did not say anything. Barbara did not say anything. She opened her mailbox, pulled out a stack of envelopes, and walked back to her car. Just before she got in, she looked at me and said, "You think you won." I said I did not think anything, I just built a fence. She said, "This is not over." I said it had been over for months and she was the only one who did not know it. She got in her car and drove away. That was the last time I saw her. The district attorney never filed charges. They said there was evidence of financial mismanagement, but not enough to prove criminal intent. Barbara kept her house, but she sold the rental property. Michael Dunn never came back. The HOA recovered about $15,000 through the settlement with Prestige, which they used to repave the pool parking lot and replace the entrance sign. People were happy with that. I was happy with my fence. I still work nights as a fire alarm technician. I still come home in the morning and sleep through the afternoon. The difference now is that when I pull into my driveway, I do not have to worry about someone standing in my yard with a tape measure and a clipboard, hunting for violations that do not exist. I do not have to worry about fines or liens or attorney letters. I just park my car, walk inside, and go to sleep. It is boring. It is perfect. I will see you again soon.